As the holy month of Ramadan wraps up this week, I can't help but think about the disapproval from Christians as they say Islam is too extreme. How could their God demand 30 days of fasting? However, their Lent could be seen as Ramadan light. In both religions, we see a theme of unworthy humans suffering in a futile attempt to appease a God who never wanted them to succeed in the first place. My heart breaks each time I hear someone claim that a cancer diagnosis or home foreclosure is just a lesson from God. Kids should not have to suffer to pay for their parents' mistakes. If you believe that suffering leads to atonement, give us a call because the show is starting now. Welcome, everyone. Today is March 15th, 2026. I'm your host, Dr. Ben, and joining me is the one, the only, Holy Kool-Aid. How are you doing today?
Hey, it's super good to be here. I'm feeling great and I'm ready for an incredible show, and it's great to be back. I think this is the first time that we've hosted one together, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be good. It's been a long time for you on this show for sure. And since it's been a while, would you like to share with the audience who you are, kind of what your content is about, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So I'm a YouTuber. I have a show called Holy Kool-Aid where I explore all kinds of claims related to paranormal fraud, religious fundamentalism, as well as things like history and archaeology. How much of the claims in these books, like the Bible, are actually true? So I'll go through and I'll look at the archaeology and what we've actually learned from other ancient Southwest Asian or formerly Near Eastern literature, and I'll look at what there is that's actually verifiable versus what is legend or mythology. And I also will explore things like faith healing claims, people who say that they can do miraculous things. I look at psychics and all the tricks that they use. But the primary goal is to promote critical thinking and scientific skepticism.
Well, what a coincidence, because Talk Heathen is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that has a similar mission in promoting atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. And this is a live call in show. I know I'm seeing some calls being screened right now, but we do have open lines available if you want to talk to us about religion, if you want to talk to us about cosmology, if you want to talk about psychics, a supernatural experience that you may have had, or if you just have a question about, how do you talk to people about these topics? How do you engage in honest debate? We're happy to take your calls. Of course, we're going to prioritize any disagreements. So even if you're an atheist and you have a hot take that you want to talk to us about, we'd love to have a discussion with you. And we are here not only on YouTube in the horizontal format, we also have a stream in the vertical format, and we are on TikTok as well. So welcome to all the new audience that we have on both platforms. If you'd like to get your call in, you can call 512-991-9242, or from your computer, you can use tiny.cc/callth. And of course, there's some other people here that make this mission possible. Let's go to the crew cam. We've got lovely faces back there, video, audio people, moderators, notes and stamps people, and our call screeners. And we're also constantly looking for new people to help us out in this area. So if you would like to be an attractive crew member or be a guest on one of the shows, or maybe even become a host, you can send an email to volunteer@atheist-community.org to get involved. And with all those announcements being said, Holy Kool-Aid, how do you feel about getting into a caller?
I'm so down. Let's do this.
All right. Let's talk with Lewis. Him from New York. Lewis, you are live on Talk Heathen. It sounds like you want to talk about a question about moral progress and in-groups. Tell us a little bit more about your position.
Hey there. Yeah, so I've been thinking about this question. Like, if we often rightfully criticize religious moral systems for restricting moral concern to their own in-group, right, if moral progress has historically expanded beyond those boundaries to include groups like women, and the trans community, why should species membership be a boundary at all?
I'm not sure exactly what the question. Are you saying why shouldn't we talk about things like veganism as well, or are you saying that we should bring animals to the table to join in the conversation?
Well, obviously not bringing animals into the table to have conversation, right? Because they can't, right? But
Hmm.
for moral consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. And I think there's a lot of content creators within this sphere that have addressed, animal rights and stuff. It's one of those things where if you're making videos about moral philosophy, absolutely, I see it as something worth talking about. If you're making videos about religion, sure, there's some overlap. I don't see why you can't talk about it, but I also, you know, people have different areas of focus and different priorities.
Yeah, well, I mean, not me. I'm saying we as a community, like atheists and skeptics, right? Which would include you.
Mhm.
Do you think that
Yeah.
you should consider expanding your circle of moral consideration to other species?
I think yes. Here's the situation though, Lewis. And so when we talk about the broader atheist community, right? I think there are a lot of people in the community doing this, and where animal rights are kind of their niche and their battle that they're going to the front lines about. Here's the problem though, like, and it's not a problem with the moral argument itself. I think that ultimately, yes, animal rights need to be a consideration if we're going to be ethical people, right? But here's the problem as far as dedicating our time and energy to certain activist efforts. We only have a limited amount of time, a little bit of limited amount of influence, and limited amount of expertise. So each person has to make a decision about what fights they're going to specifically go to battle for, right? And so a lot of times that's, even if we wanted to undertake all of these different avenues, it would actually dilute the advocacy efforts that we would make, because you're trying to spread yourself too thin. Like if I decided that I needed to add this extra big focus on veganism and animal rights, like while those are good things, I need to be in the trans space right now. Like right now, there are people that are being oppressed, particularly immigrant groups, particularly trans people, people that don't fit in with who are seen as kind of the majority, if you will. And so there's lots of different efforts that need to be seen, and even we can say yes, this is an important issue without having to completely derail the content that we're already making. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree with the sentiment. I was more referring not to like you necessarily advocating for this on your show, but I'm just saying like in your personal life, in our personal lives, do you think it should be a good idea to like expand that circle to not exclude other species? I'm not saying that you should necessarily advocate for that, but just like in our own personal lives.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who've touched on this. Peter Singer, notably among them, talking about the expanding circle of morality. How throughout history we've had these ideas about morality. Initially, we cared mostly about our family, our core group of kin, the people who we're related to, who are most likely going to be able to pass on genes that we share with them. So, in a way, it's the genetic material that we carry is being passed on by our siblings or by our children, our nephews and nieces. And so, those are the people who we care the most about, that we protect the most, because the people who don't do that, their genes die out. As we grew as a species, and we're a very social species, we found that societies that looked after their own group beyond just kin tended to fare better than ones who were, eating each other alive, not cannibalism per se, but as a matter of speech. And then that has expanded out more and more to now where we live in a global interconnected society. The circle of morality has expanded beyond that. And now Singer and others like Alex O'Connor have argued for expanding it out to include animals and species that are not human. So I think that There are very solid arguments to be made. I think that there's a strong case to be made for not just veganism but animal rights in general. As far as whether or not I'm going to speak about it on my channel, again, I know that's not exactly what you're getting at, but I think that oftentimes within the atheist community or the skeptic and the activist communities, we we want everyone to talk about every cause all at once. And think that from the standpoint of impact measurement, of how much impact can I personally have on the world, there are some ways that are better than others. And yes, we could have everyone talking about every issue, but for me, there's a lot of issues that I care about that I think that are good issues and fights worth having. Like LGBT rights is one of them, and I have mentioned it on my channel, but I'm by no means an expert in this area. And I know that if all of a sudden my channel is talking about, concerns related to LGBT issues, it's talking about veganism, it's talking about politics, it's talking about the importance of breast cancer awareness, all of a sudden my core message starts to become diluted. And I think that there's ways where like I can lean into my expertise and my specialty to really reach a bigger audience, to change, for example, people's minds surrounding things like whether or not the Bible is literally true. And as they start questioning those dogmas, maybe they start becoming more open-minded in other areas like LGBT rights. So it's a matter of like, where am I going to have the biggest, most important impact overall? That's hard to measure. But in terms of my own personal life, yeah, I do think about these things.
Yeah, that's great, and I think, I mean, that's really kind of my point, right? I certainly didn't, I'm not expecting you guys to, have this focus, whether in your own channels or in this channel on, the topic of veganism. That wasn't my concern. I do have like a final thought, and I'm just wondering what both of your position on this is, or what your thoughts on this is. Like, what should be the grounding for moral consideration? Should it be sapience or sentience? What would be a better grounding for like moral consideration?
Ben, you want to take this one?
Honestly, I don't really care about that far into philosophy. The fact is, like, I get, Louis, you're coming from a great place of like wanting to do the absolute like best thing for everybody at all times. That's awesome. I'm in a situation right now where like me, like being part of a minority group that is actively under fire, I don't have a lot of luxury of thinking about how can I maximize like ethical perfection in my life. Like there's so many things that have greater utility to demand my attention. And like, yeah, I would love to be in a place where everybody is so well taken care of that we can really dig into this philosophy. But honestly, like I'm so stretched thin with just trying to say out to the world, like I deserve to live with rights. I deserve healthcare, like those kind of things that like I don't know, Lewis, if you're part of any community that's particularly under fire right now, but like, and I'm very happy that you're able to think about this stuff. But for a lot of us right now, we are just surviving, and this is not really the time for us to get that deep into it. So my response is I don't really care right now, and I apologize.
And your co-host, does your co-host have a thought on that?
I mean, I would say in general, my approach is I want to minimize suffering. And I personally care a lot less about the suffering of, say, a shrimp that has one single neuron throughout its entire body compared to something like a dog. If I see someone, beating a dog on the side of the street, I'm going to care more. I have more qualms personally about eating bacon than I do about eating, poultry. But that said, I do think that it comes down to, ability for an animal to suffer. But again, there we do our best as we are able. And I think, as Ben pointed out, like there's times in our lives where it's like, yeah, things are going great and we can kind of take more of this stuff into consideration. And then there's times when like you're literally like fighting just to keep your head above water. And so I don't see the animal rights cause and the vegan cause as bad. I don't see it as something that's not a conversation worth having. But I think right now we're engaged in fights that are more close to home.
Okay, look, I appreciate your openness to discussing this and your responses. I do understand them. I just want to make sure that I'm sensitive to your concerns, and I think they are definitely concerns. So I appreciate your time on this, and I would just encourage you guys to, when you have some more time, to think about this issue a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's not that I haven't thought extensively about this issue. I stopped eating meat for years, specifically because of the moral arguments. And then I went through a phase where like my mental health was in the toilet. I was going through a lot of stuff, and I started traveling again, and I was just like, there's so many things that I am stressed about and worried about. And trying to find a good, healthy, clean source of protein while I'm on the road in other countries is just not one of the extra mental burdens that I wanted to continue taking on. So I think we do our best as we can. And I'm no moral exemplar. I'm not going to claim that I have the moral high ground on everything, but yeah, I do think about these things.
Yeah, and to give another comment on that, like I think there is, like, yeah, there's definitely like a lot to say about animal rights being a very, very important issue. Um, and to Thomas's point, this fact that like oftentimes perfection is the enemy of the good, and there are a lot of us who want to be as ethical as possible in every way, and I think that's a reasonable aspiration. I don't think it's attainable, and I think that a lot of people are going to be prone to some mental health trouble because of that. Because when you get into this thing of, I can't do all these things, I'm like, there's at some point where you're going to act unethically, and it's just inevitable. And as much as I don't want that to happen, like you can't be a perfect person, and so it's okay to, like, especially right now, have some time and think, I'm doing the best I can with my energy level, with my resources, and all that. So again, like, I don't think it's a bad thing to talk about, but I do think it's harmful to constantly seek perfection when it's unattainable. So I just wanted to weigh in with that little piece.
Oh no, I appreciate that, and I definitely there's nothing about my position that says that we can be perfect, right? That's not the vegan position at all, of course. So yeah, no, I completely agree that perfection is something that is unattainable for humans. But I think also what both of you guys seem to indicate is that we should try to do our best, right? And I would argue in the most honest way we can, right? Do the best we can in the most honest way.
Mm.
Any other thoughts on that? Or because I mean, we could dig into that honest. We could dig into that. What do you mean by the honest way? Do you think that our way is less honest, or what would you say?
I'm not accusing you guys of being dishonest or anything like that. But I'm just saying, for like, even for myself, right? Like, I had lots of rationalizations when I first was approached with this idea of including animals in my moral consideration. So that's really what I'm talking about, is like these rationalizations that I and many people use to try to continue with like habits that we have been culturally conditioned into accepting. And so that's really what I meant by honest, like in the most honest way we can. That wasn't accusatory of you guys.
Gotcha.
Cool. Well, I can't.
Else from Holy Kool-Aid?
Not for me. No, I'm ready to move on to the next call, but I can't see if we have a lot of calls waiting that we need a rush to get to, or if we have none and we need people to call in and drag out this conversation. So, but I'm ready to move on to whatever topic you guys want.
All right, Lewis. Anything else from you on this?
No, that's it. Just I think I've made my points, and I appreciate you being open-minded on this. And yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Have a good day, Lewis.
Take care.
I think he's got a good point. Yeah. It's just that, like, one thing that I noticed, I've been doing this full time for 10 years, is that oftentimes within the activism community, we really, really want to be morally perfect. because and we're all fighting for causes. The problem is that we get pulled in so many different directions, and then we make these dividing lines where our groups become smaller and smaller and smaller. And you have some people that are like, you're not, doing this right. You're not doing this right. You should be speaking up on this issue. You should be, a vegan, or you should be this. And we're getting eaten alive. There's so many issues that we're losing the ground on. And if we instead were able to like find points of common ground and unity to unite around and be like, yeah, there's going to be people in our community that have differences of opinion, but what can we coalesce around?
Yeah, and I saw a comment in the side chat, like, completely straw manning my point. They're claiming that I said that we can't be perfect, so we shouldn't even try. That's not at all what I was saying. But honestly, there are some points of this discussion that I find a little bit infuriating because, like, I'm very happy that there are people out there who have so much time and brain power to dedicate to a variety of different causes. I lost my job recently because I'm trans. Like, there are people out there who are losing healthcare right now because they're trans or because they're an immigrant. Like, people are being harassed. There's violence happening to people because of who they are. And so to say that people like me should just find time, find the ability to add on this extra thing. And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's a little bit, it seems just a little bit lacking tact, I guess, to say, yeah, I get that you're under fire, but what about this other thing? And like, you don't know the suffering that humans are going through right now, or it seems like you're unaware of the reality that a lot of people are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if you're in a situation where you have to decide, do I put food on the table or do I champion this issue today? Like, sure, you get to make that choice for yourself, but that has to be a personal choice. And I don't think that shaming people that they're not ethical enough because they're eating meat is, like, I don't think that's effective, and I don't think that's the way to. I think we need to improve systemic things before we get into. I mean, like, not saying it's insignificant or that people shouldn't be doing things individually, but there are bigger systemic things that need to change before it is reasonable for a lot of people. So
I'm sorry about your job. That fucking sucks. But I think, and I don't think that Lewis specifically was going on the offensive in that way. It didn't come off to me that way, at least. But I do completely agree that, like, there's been times in my life when I've been struggling to get through, and it's like, if you're just trying to kind of make it through the day, and and you're struggling financially and you're struggling with all these other issues, and now you have to like check every single package and every single restaurant, and where can you eat and where can you not eat and what can you do. It's an extra burden that I think that when you're in the headspace where you can focus on that stuff and you can dedicate mental resources and you have the spoons for it, then absolutely, sure, like, consider this stuff, look into it, and but it's we're in tough times at the moment.
Yeah. So with that, we do have open lines. We've got lots of open lines. So please, I see some people in the side chat saying that evolution isn't real. Call in because we want to talk to you about that. Give us your best argument for why evolution is defeated, as you say. If anybody else wants to weigh in on the vegan topic, if you want to weigh in on psychics, we have open lines. So
faith healers, Bible archaeology.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, we've got a little bit of time to chat, but as we were kind of talking beforehand about faith healing, psychics, and all that, how would you kind of recommend lay people to start engaging with this topic? Or like, what are some good arguments you like to rely on with this type of thing?
I think it depends on the argument that's being made, right? So if you're talking to someone who claims that this stuff is real and they say that faith healers can cure me or psychics can see the future, then I think the first thing would be to see like how invested are they in this conversation? Is it something that they just believe because they heard a few arguments and they saw something convincing? If that's the case, maybe the alternative position, show them some of my videos, or the works of like James Randi, who has investigated this stuff for years, who had $1 million challenge to anyone who could present evidence of any paranormal or supernatural claim, and no one was able to do it. Anytime that they've been under these types of scientific controls, it's fallen flat. If, on the other hand, the person is super emotionally invested in this topic for whatever reason, maybe it's they believe in faith healing, but there's an underlying thing that's going to prevent them from being able to actually reconsider and reevaluate their position, then try to get at that underlying thing first. So ask some deeper questions. Really, why do you believe this? What is your reasoning? What is your what's behind it? Street epistemology is a tactic that was put forth, made popular by Anthony Magnabosco, and he talks about how you can use the Socratic method to ask people questions, so it's not a confrontational me versus you fight where you're going to get this opposite reaction blowback, but instead you're with someone, you're working together to find what the truth is. You're on a journey together, and then when you ask them questions, you say, why do you believe this? Interesting. Are there other beliefs that you hold for this same reason? So if this wasn't the case, would you still believe this? And if they say, well, yes, then, well, that's not the real reason they're holding to this belief. Dig deeper. Try to find out what is the underlying epistemic infrastructure that is supporting all of this. And I found that other times, so there's people who believe something specifically, they believe the belief, and then there's other people who they're like, yeah, it's BS, but it makes people feel good, or there's some utility for it, but religion has these positive effects. And then that's a completely different argument. Then you have to ask questions like, well, heroin feels good for a junkie, but I'm not going to give it to them. It's not good for them. And so why should I, when people say that it feels good to talk to a psychic and have your beliefs supported, or have them say that they can talk to your dead loved one, it might feel good, but is it a coping mechanism that's preventing someone from moving on and healing the loss of a loved one? Is it something that is in the long run actually negative and harmful, and you can have a psychic that is manipulating someone and who is exploiting them of their life savings or exorbitant amounts of money? I think that those are different questions, because then the person who you're arguing with might see the evidence and realize it's BS, but still be arguing from a utilitarian position for something like faith healing and faith and religion and belief. And then I think that you can kind of push back from an angle of, are there healthier alternatives? Are there ways that you can use therapy to overcome grief and bereavement? Are there ways that you can use other stuff to move forward, charities that are secular, etc.?
Yeah, and I love your mention of street epistemology. It's one of my favorite methods to utilize as well. And I do think it's very, very effective on a lot of issues. Um, and yeah, it's that delicate balance of like managing somebody's emotions and they're feeling good with a particular thing versus how much risk does it put this person at for things like, I don't know, telephone scammers, internet scammers. Like if you already have that belief in your head that somebody else has the power to change your life with this whatever thing they're claiming, then it's easy to not think through the process of is am I actually getting ticketed by somebody who's got this weird URL and stuff and can't can't tell me their name, can't tell me where they're from. They're telling me the IRS is after me and going to send cops to my house this afternoon. Like, I mean, one of them seems very ridiculous, but there's a reason why those scammers keep doing what they do. They're effective. They get the money that they want. And I think that the methods that those scammers utilize are very similar to the things that psychics utilize or other faith healers. So you bring up a lot of really, really good points there.
Oftentimes also we don't realize that in order to get to a point where we were able to question core beliefs that we hold, there were multiple steps that took us to get there. So in my case, at least, I believed that everything in the Bible was 100% literally true. 6-day creation, young Earth creationism, the Earth's 6,000 years old, miracles are real, all of it. And I wasn't able to just all of a sudden start questioning and skeptically analyzing the Bible on day one. It took steps where I had people tell me who I trusted, youth pastors who would say things like, it's okay to believe that not everything in the Bible is literally true. You can still hold on to your faith and explore this. And that kind of opened me up to thinking maybe some stuff's allegorical. Or I had a friend who said, truth withstands scrutiny. So you shouldn't be afraid. The Bible can stand on its own merit if it's true. You can explore it, and God doesn't need someone, some religious apologist to defend him. And it was these little things that made me start realizing, like, yes, it is okay. Skepticism is healthy. It is a good thing to explore so that we don't fall prey to these scammers and these con artists and these fraudsters. And every single other area of our life, we're told to think critically. If someone tells you that they're a Nigerian prince who has inherited this massive amount of money and they just need your bank details to send it to you, maybe start thinking a little bit skeptically. And the same should hold true for people who say that if you just stop taking your cancer medication and you send them all of the money instead to the tithe bucket, that they're going to be able to cure you. These are things that have negative consequences. And I think that one of the best ways to reach them, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, is that we oftentimes within the skeptic community, we focus so much on the data and the data points and the science and the arguments, and we don't realize that humans are inherently emotional people. We connect with stories, with people, with things that touch us emotionally. And so if you say, oh, there's 50,000 people statistically who died because of XYZ, it's a number. But if we walk them through, here's this person who believed in this faith healer and they stopped taking their medication and they died and they genuinely believed it, and here's their story, and here's all the people who are affected, that's much more powerful. Now, it's one person instead of 50,000, but it puts a face to it. It makes it real. It makes it something that all of us can see this person, their hopes, their dreams, their family, their aspiration, and then we connect on a human level.
Yeah, and that's a great place to table this discussion for right now, because we have a theist caller on the line.
Ooh, good.
Let's talk with Lee, no pronouns given, from Texas, wants to declare evolution is defeated. Tell us more about your position.
Well, it is defeated because there's no evidence for evolution at all. The scientists claim, or some scientists do, there are many scientists who understand that it is not reality, but there are many who do still profess evolution. The question is, based on the scientific method, when has anyone ever seen any evolution take place?
First of all, Lee, I want to ask, tell me in your own words, describe for me the scientific method.
Scientific method is observation. You must observe to be able to prove it as a fact. So they say...
Okay, so that's one step. That's one step of the scientific method. Now tell me, Lee, tell me the rest of the steps of the scientific method.
That is the actual way that you prove something.
Lee, you need to listen to me, buddy. Lee, okay, so you got one step. So the first step is observation, but observation not of a phenomenon, it's observation of something in the world that you're going to ask a question about, right? So observation alone isn't the full scientific method. So for you to say that evolution is false because you haven't observed it happen, number one, is actually not true. We can go into that in a second, how we are constantly observing evolution on a day-to-day basis. But you're missing a good chunk of what the scientific method is.
When did you see some evolution? Tell me right now, when have you seen some evolution?
Microbiology is a fantastic example, right? Do you believe that germs cause infections?
Give me an example in microbiology, how you have seen some evolution in microbiology.
Yeah, I've actually caused evolution in microbiology in my undergrad micro lab.
Evolution has to happen on its own. Causation.
Lee, Lee, can you define evolution for me?
Once you do something in the laboratory, that's in...
Lee, give me a definition, please.
Your whole premise.
Give me a definition.
I'm asking you, when have you ever
No,
seen
Lee,
any evolution?
I am trying to explain it. You have to answer my question of what is evolution. We need to be on the same page.
I'm asking you, when have you seen any evolution?
Lee, I am explaining to you. You have to listen to me, and you have to go with me through the conversation.
Explanation is
Lee, I'm going to mute you. Okay.
Can I
I'm
jump
muting
in
you, Lee.
really
Yeah,
fast? I think that
absolutely. Jump in.
Lee, where I think that Ben and I want to go is we want to talk to you if you're open, if you're actually open to listening and open to talking and because I want to follow the truth. I want to go where the evidence leads. And I can give you so much evidence for evolution. I've been covering this topic on my channel now for over 10 years, along with a bunch of other stuff. And we can look at so many different lines of evidence from, morphology to genetics and DNA evidence to, the way that it evolves to, the age of the earth to, there's so many different things, comparative anatomy, et cetera. I am more than happy to dive into these topics with you, but we want to make sure that we're not talking past each other so that we can have a productive conversation. And in order to be able to have a productive conversation, we don't want to give you a definition or evidence for something that's not what you're talking about. So if you can give us a definition for what you mean when you say evolution, are you talking about where one species now can reproduce with a different species, or it becomes a new species and can no longer reproduce with the previous species because they've been separated for a long time, and you're looking at evidence from like ring species? Are you looking not at speciation, but like micro changes that add up to macro changes? As we see, as Ben was talking about in the lab, where you have bacteria that will have, genetic changes that will occur that then, cause it to have different traits and different characteristics. What specifically are you asking us here when you say that you want evidence for evolution?
All right, I'm going to unmute you, Lee, but you have to engage with us in the conversation.
Yeah, engage with me. Talk with me here.
So here's the thing. You have to listen, though. It has to be a two-way street, right?
I'm asking you the question. Just simply give me an example where you've seen some evolution take place. Give me a simple example.
That's exactly where I was going with you, Lee. But again, here, you have to, before I go further into that, I need to know what you mean by evolution.
What do you mean? You tell me. You're the one that's defining all this stuff. Tell me.
Cool. So I will define it then. I will define it. Evolution is change in allele frequency over time.
Give me a simple example.
I'm giving, Lee, I'm going to mute you again. Okay. So evolution, the scientific definition of evolution is the change in allele frequency over time. And so alleles are the way different genes are expressed. So an example of an allele could be if you have brown hair or blonde hair, or if you have webbed feet, or if you have flippers, if you have a beak, if you have feathers, all that stuff. Those are different types of alleles. And so what we see is we see changes in those alleles in the frequency of the population over time. So if you have, let's say, a group of people that all have blonde hair, and you introduce somebody with brown hair, and you start building a population from there, over time, you're going to see pretty much the whole community with brown hair, because more likely because it's a dominant trait. You're going to see a higher frequency of that over time. And so that is at the core of what evolution ends up being, because we see why I use bacteria as a very good example is because they replicate very, very, very fast. And so we can actually see macroscopic changes over a very short period of time. And this is the reason why antibiotic resistance happens. So the reason why certain antibiotics won't work anymore is because the bacteria that died from those antibiotics it left those that would survive, and the ones that survive reproduce. And so now you have only bacteria that survive under certain antibiotics, and then it causes a big problem as far as disease protection in our society. So there are plenty of examples that I'm giving you here of evolution happening over a reasonable time frame that we can see. So I would say that debunks your claim that evolution is something that is not observed at the moment. But I'm going to unmute you and see your response to that.
What's that again? You hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you. Did you listen or did you talk the whole
All
time?
Well, let me put it like this. Bacteria remaining bacteria, viruses remaining viruses, finches remaining finches, humans remaining humans does not prove evolution. It only proves creation. That's the only thing it proves. You cannot, the creation goes by kinds. To prove evolution, you have to show one species.
What? Yeah. So Lee, what factors make one kind?
Hold on,
No,
let me finish making my statement.
No. Let me ask you a question.
Statement. Without that, hold on a second. Let me finish making my statement. Without that, you got nothing. Evolution has no relativeness to anything in regards to nature, as far as how things came about. Evolution has no relative, no relation to it at all. Because you have to be able to show one species turning into a whole nother species. Where did you see that happen?
Yeah, Lee, so let's break this down. What factors keep one kind in a category versus another?
When did you see the kinds jump? When did you see...
That's Lee, you're dodging my question. Thomas, jump in here. But Lee, you have to answer the question and not just dodge it, because
Lee,
I asked you a question.
I will give you, Lee, I will give you what you want on a silver platter, mate.
Is that what you're saying?
So, Lee, you can't just talk over me this whole time.
Relationship to anything.
Lee, I'm trying.
Lee, this is why we're muting you. Here's the problem.
Lee, you're muted. You're muted. I think he's still talking over us, but I can't hear him. Lee, here's the thing, and we can't hear you if you're talking, so you might as well listen. I am trying, I'm desperately trying to give you an example of speciation, because that's what it sounded like you were saying, was you want to see one, you called it a kind. I have yet to see a single creationist organization be able to define what a kind is, but we'll say species. If you want to say it's, somewhere up and down on the, kingdom species, you could say it's a clade or class or whatever. But if you want to see one species become another species, there are many examples of what are known as ring species, where you have two different, we'll say birds or geckos or any animal that you want, where they will be separated for a period of time. And for example, around a mountain range, one group of the species will go one way, another group will go another way, and then they're reproducing and they're evolving, and over time there's mutations that are changing their genetic material. Some of them are developing different colors, different sexual characteristics, etc. And by the time these two species have slowly migrated, separated by a mountain range, and they meet back up at the top, sometimes, hundreds or thousands of years later, they are so fundamentally different that they are now no longer able to reproduce with each other. Now, this one can reproduce with this one, this one, all the way back around the chain, because they're all somewhat similarly related to each other. But when they get back around to the beginning, they're so different that they can no longer reproduce. They are a different species. We see this in our genetic material. We see the fact that we share like 98% of our genetic content with a chimpanzee. And you look at how similar they are in terms of, hands with opposable thumbs, and they stand upright, and they have a face that has two eyes and a mouth and a nose, and all of this stuff is similar. You go to an osteological museum where you see all of the bones and all of the vertebrates. They have two arms where two limbs where the arms are, two limbs where the legs are. But even the fingers, whether it's a whale, a fish, or an otter or a beaver, there's 5 appendages. Sometimes they grow really long and they become wings that are kind of webbed together and they can glide. Sometimes they have webbed fingers and they become fins. But the bone structure, just the comparative anatomy alone, there's so many similarities that track with genetic relatedness. So the more genes you have in common, the closer you look. And we see this change over time. We see this as humans go further and further back in time. There's different ways that we can date the bone samples. We can measure and take the DNA and actually see how much genetic similarities there are between us and, say, a Neanderthal. And as you get further back, there's differences where you hit certain fossils that are hard to tell if it's a human or an ape, like Australopithecus afarensis. It has the same structure as a human, or the same bone structure as an ape, except like the skull, the spot where the spine fuses to the skull, the forendum magnum, is positioned differently from an ape where it's standing on all fours. All of a sudden, the position of that bone fusion is below the skull, where it would be on a human or on a primate that's actually standing upright. So there's all of these little transitions where we see like we're not in the 1800s anymore. We have a plethora of millions and millions and millions of these fossils that biologists have observed, where it's like, oh my God, we're not looking for a missing link or a transitional fossil, because every single fossil is transitional. There's no stage where you just have these clear cut, it's only this, and it's every single thing is on a gradient, changing in different directions and branching out like a bush in every single direction, and they're becoming over time small changes, adapting to fit their environment. So that's what we say when we say that there's an abundance of evidence. I've only scratched at like less than a fraction of 1% of all that we have, but like I really encourage you to actually go and study the other side of this, because it sounds like you just have these talking points that you're wanting to talk over people rather than actually listen and understand the other side.
Yeah, I'll give you one more chance, Lee. You have to engage with us, though, and not just talk
you're
over.
not engaging. You're trying to overtalk me and outtalk me, mute me, and all these. These are not good conversations.
Lee, you haven't answered a single question that we've asked.
You have no logic.
So, all right. So I'm gonna.
You're just about.
I don't think this is really worth our time anymore, Lee. We're gonna say goodbye. Thanks for your call. I hope you think a little bit more about this. I figure we can have a more fruitful discussion without Lee trying to talk over us. But something that you definitely got to the place where I was wanting to get him to as well. This idea that if you're trying to claim that there are different kinds that cannot overlap, that are totally separate things, you have a burden to demonstrate that you can define each kind, and you can define them specifically enough to where you can define everything that is included in that category and not leave out anything, and make sure you leave out everything that would be excluded. And that's a very, very difficult task, because there's so much overlap within all of the animal kingdom, and to where even if you said, well, a mammal is something that has fur and has milk and does not lay eggs, we have examples of exceptions where mammals do lay eggs. And so it is very difficult to find these very strict categories where nothing overlaps. And I think that's one of the burdens that creationists, especially anti-evolution creationists, have to actually make an argument for.
I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult to understand, and why people like Kent Hovind, who will say like, you'll never see, crocodile or evolve from a duck or something. And, they have this idea that that's what evolution is, that just one day it's one species and then poof, it's the next. And that what's difficult to understand about evolution is that you are always the same species as your parents and your offspring. When you start, sort of like when you look at the color yellow on a spectrum, it's like, is there a single point where you can draw a line and say, okay, now this isn't yellow, it's, this is orange, or this is green? It's really, really hard to find that defining point, because the pixels right before and right after look almost identical, right?
Yep.
But over time, you have these tiny, minor, gradual changes that add up. So like I was saying with ring species, if you have two species that are separated for long enough, whether it's, land masses on tectonic plates that separate and then, eventually they're reintroduced to each other, or whether it's going around a mountain range or whatever the case may be, you have species that are separated, and when their migratory patterns eventually meet back up, they're so different from each other that they can no longer reproduce. And we have many examples of this. So you're always the same species as your parents and your offspring, but somewhere along the line, 5,000 generations later, there's a noticeable difference there. So you're looking at time spans that are difficult for our minds to wrap around, and yet all of the evidence from all these competing lines back that up. So if you're looking at the age of the Earth, if you're doing various forms of radiocarbon dating on stuff, you can have 10 different ways of dating something that all land on exactly the same date or the same date range. And we see, okay, over time, this fossil is separated in time by 100,000 years from this one here. And you see the change in the bone structure and the morphology, the changes over time genetically between various organisms. So that's what we say when we say that there is evidence of evolution. It's just not this clear cut, one day you wake up and you're, half duck, half crocodile.
Yeah, and that color analogy is really effective, I think. I think that's a good one for people to keep in their back pocket for discussions like this. And before we get into the next call, I see you in the queue. We do have another theist waiting on the line, so don't go anywhere. I'm just going to make a couple announcements before we take that caller. But we have some super chats from, first of all, from Anne Christine, the Donut Fiend, gives $5 and says, "What is the evidence for a 6-day creation?" So thank you so much for that super chat. If anybody wants to call in defending a 6-day creation, we'd love to have you on the line today. And then we have a super chat from Kelly Laughlin, who's also been a member for 2 years and is also one of the hosts of Truth Wanted, gives $2 and says, "Watch Truth Wanted Friday nights at 7 Central." And definitely, if you want more content like this, go check that out as well. Just a couple more brief announcements here. We do want you to know what's going on in our community. So if you are curious about other events, go to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn about the organization itself, its policies, and how you can get involved. Also, we have merch if you want to go to tiny.cc/merchACA, and you can get your crop tops, your t-shirts. I said I was going to get a crop top. I have not done that yet. I apologize. That is coming in the near future. Maybe if we get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, I will get the crop top and wear it for a stream. We'll see if I can get approval to do that. Another way to support us is to send super chats like we're reading here. We will read them probably at the end of the show if we get any more of those. Also, please like the video, subscribe, and comment, chat in the side chat. All of those go a very, very long way in sharing out the content. And we want to hear from you. Let us know what you liked, what you thought was effective, and also what you think we could do better. And you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. Let us know your thoughts. So without further ado, let us get into this next call. We have Zil Zone. He, him from New York is a theist. If I can hit the button. Sounds like you want to ask how the singularity or initial state is not considered magic under the atheist worldview. Zil, you are live on Talk Heathen. What are your thoughts?
Yo, yo, yo. Hope everyone's doing well today. God bless. So I did want to talk about the origin of the universe today, a little bit of cosmology with you guys. And specifically the singularity or the initial state. I guess atheists have different cosmology. What would you say your views are? Do you think the universe came from a singularity or initial state?
I guess I'll go first then. My viewpoint on this is I don't know. I'm not a physicist, and I don't know enough about this to really give a hypothesis. My answer is there are a lot of different hypotheses out there, and I don't know. And I'm sitting pretty contently in the I don't know space on that. What about you, Thomas? Oh, I think you're muted, maybe.
Sorry about that. My position is that when physicists look at the cosmic microwave background radiation, there's a few things that they notice. And one of them is that the further back in time they look, because light takes time to travel to us, right? And so the further away we look, the further back in time we're looking. And what they've noticed is that as you look further back in time, the universe was much more hot, it was much more dense, and also the universe is expanding out. So you wind back the clock and it does appear that everything did kind of come from a much more dense, hot state. Now, was it one pinpoint? It doesn't really appear that it works quite like that. It seems to be expanding from everywhere at once, which is like hard to wrap your mind around. As far as what was before the Big Bang, I don't know. Like, I kind of an answer to your question, I do think that there was a singularity event, but I don't know if the universe is cyclical. I don't know if there's many worlds, if there are, if there's a multiverse. There's a certain point where I think physicists have a lot of questions, but it becomes very difficult to gather data before the Big Bang. But what we do know is that the universe itself is at least 13 plus billion years old, because that's what we can measure, that's what we can track it back to. Beyond that, it kind of becomes harder to tell.
Okay, cool. All right, so towards the point, if there was an initial state or singularity, which would be, I assume, the origin of the universe, it's understood that it's some quantum pool of particles, seen and unseen, that physics basically break down at this point. Would you agree that's the general understanding?
I would say, like, physics as we understand it, our current models of physics break down.
It requires
Yes.
that physics break down at this point. Would you agree?
I would say our current understanding of physics. So, for example, let me paint it in a way that's easier to understand. Newton created his I say created, he developed his laws of physics where he was looking at motion, he was looking at things like gravity, and he didn't necessarily know why objects attracted each other, but he knew that they did, and he created formulas that were able to measure that interaction with a certain degree of precision. And then suddenly physicists, as we started measuring things like, the orbit of Mercury's moons, I believe, or we start measuring things on the quantum level of, quantum particles, Newton's physics started breaking down at the macro level, and then Einstein contributed, and then his theories started breaking down at the quantum level. That doesn't necessarily mean that physics itself just suddenly doesn't exist. It just means that there's certain aspects and certain characteristics of our universe that when things get really, really hot and really dense, these models, we need something more. We need something a little bit better. I don't know what that is.
Okay, so science gives the best guess based on empirical knowledge and data, correct?
Yeah, you could say that.
The thing with special relativity is that's a repeatable experiment. We can run experiments to confirm that theory. The problem with the initial state is we can't rerun that experiment. Okay, now what do you?
Well, can I add one small caveat? We can't rerun the creation of the universe, but that's not to say that we can't observe the cosmic microwave background radiation, that we can't look back in time, as I was saying.
Okay. Well, that would be the consequence of the creation. Still, we can't recreate the initial conditions. We don't know what they are. The understanding is that physics breaks down in some way we don't understand. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It could just be some quantum mechanics we don't yet know about, for example. But
it's possible, and that's the thing. Like a lot of these models like get more and more nuanced as well, and so it might be that we need a completely different model. It also might be we're not at the level of detail with our current models to where we can make more reasonable like predictions about what has happened. And I would say that I agree with the fact that we can't go back and redo the creation of the universe, which does make it more difficult, especially statistically speaking. We have an n equals 1 that we know of, and so this is again where it's very difficult to kind of make predictions. And I would agree that the goal is to get as close as we can to that understanding. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, like how we're getting to this idea of like magic or supernatural belief.
Land my plane. I'll try to land my plane. Sorry about that. Okay, so I was assuming that magic was considered where physics breaks down, or I guess an atheist critique of Christianity is, whoa, magic created the universe. But I'm suggesting that atheists actually hold to a similar position where something unexplained, some magic created the universe.
I don't think so. I think that, like, if we're using the term magic just to be a broad term to mean something we don't understand, then, like, sure, you could use that term however you want. However, there's a distinction between the atheist worldview and someone who believes in the supernatural, in that, like, what is going to, like, what fills in that blank for the thing that we don't understand. We are not claiming that is a supernatural cause. Like, more than likely, it's something that is part of whatever was before the universe, that has, like, is part of this physical reality, right? Like, we're not claiming that there's something outside of the physical reality playing a part in this. So I think to say that magic is the same, like in a Christian worldview versus, or like a theist worldview or an atheist worldview, I don't think so, because I think that what the thing that we don't understand is completely different, or the thing that we're saying we don't understand is completely different.
Jesus could have performed miracles. That's totally within the realm of possibility, isn't it?
Can I give an analogy? Because I think that there's one term that a lot of this hinges on. You said that, you know, atheists are also putting forth something that is unexplainable. And I think that there's a big difference between something that is unexplainable and something that hasn't been explained yet. So there are some things in this world that, you know, I don't necessarily know, for example, how, let's say that you take a kid and you say, how do plants work? Where do they get their nutrients from? That kid's going to have no idea. They have no way of observing photosynthesis. They have no way of testing this. It seems like magic to them. But that's not that it's unexplainable. It's not that it hasn't, like, it's something that already has been explained, that experts know how it works. And yet to that kid, it seems like magic. Magic kind of becomes this placeholder for the unexplained. Now,
Okay.
in the case of the universe, it's not just that here's something that physicists know exactly how it happened, and we just are arguing from ignorance because we haven't studied that. We don't know the arguments yet, which is possible for some things, but there's a lot of things that seem supernatural at first. And then you start to understand what's going on. An example of this is Jesus attributed epilepsy to demons and spirits, but we know what's going on in the mind. We can measure the electrical misfirings that cause seizures. We can treat it with medication. We know it's not demonic. We have better theories of disease, like the germ theory of disease, that account for things that before were attributed to the demons of plague and pestilence, etc. So as our knowledge has advanced, we found that more and more things that before we had these placeholders for our ignorance were, it's supernatural, it's something outside the natural world. Now we're starting to realize, like, oh, these gaps that we have attributed to God are getting smaller and smaller. And that's why we say, like, yeah, there's things that we don't know the answers to yet, and we're open-minded to potential possibilities. But a really like extraordinary claim like God did it requires a lot more evidence for it to convince us, because so many things that were attributed to that in the past turned out one by one to not be that.
That is interesting, and the epilepsy comment is interesting too. But Jesus is still claimed to be excuse me. Jesus still does miracles in the Bible. Now
but there's people in modern times who are, you know, like Satya Sai Baba is this Hindu guru who has millions of followers, who convinced people he was doing miracles in modern times. And we have caught on camera he's doing these sleight of hand tricks and stuff, and these, you know, prophetic things and statements that his prophecies, some of them actually he failed, he got wrong. And yet there's
Yeah.
so many millions of people today who follow this guru and other cult leaders who are convinced that they perform miracles. I don't see how pushing it back 2,000 years ago before photos and newspapers and the internet makes it any more convincing.
Yeah, well, correlation is not causation, such that they are not the same person. I don't think it follows that Jesus.
But they're not.
Necessarily the
It's not a.
case.
It's not correlation causation. It's not that one thing happened after the other and therefore was caused by it. That's not the argument that I'm making. I'm saying that here you have two people who are both people are believing that each one performed miracles. I'm like, if your standard of evidence for one is way down here, why are you not having that same standard of evidence for Satya Sai Baba to believe his miracles?
Okay, well, I don't think it's the same thing, but I don't.
How is it different?
Well, we can only know what we've recovered, and then apostolic succession is a thing.
How does that reinforce the arguments for Jesus?
Sounds like that weakens it.
Well, it grounds Jesus as a person and his teachings outside of.
Not necessarily. And there's
I'll
actually
give you,
a lot
I'll
of.
give you all of that.
Yeah.
I'll give you all of that. I'll say, yes, sure, Jesus existed as a person. So did Satya Sai Baba. How is the evidence for Jesus better?
How is it better? How is it better? Does it have to be better according to your measurement techniques?
If the evidence for Jesus. If the evidence for Jesus is not better than the evidence for Satya Sai Baba, why don't you believe in Satya Sai Baba?
What is better? See,
so
if Jesus could still be true and have only one surviving text, but still be true, this guy could have all the modern texts and still be wrong, right?
Okay, but if let's say that for Jesus, let's say that I'll grant you the four Gospels, even though like two of them pull almost verbatim from Mark. I'll grant you Paul, even though Paul never saw Jesus, he was never a witness to it. Hell, I'll grant you all 500 witnesses that are claimed to have seen Jesus, even though we don't have 500 witnesses, we just have one person that says that there were. I'll grant you all of that. Okay, so you have 506 witnesses, maybe 510 if you want to round up or whatever. I'll grant you all of that. If Satya Sai Baba has 20,000 people that all saw him at the same time on the same day, who are still alive today, who are all attesting to his miracles, by that standard, you have more witnesses who are swearing up and down, who are alive today, who we can interview, who have their testimonies recorded on video. We have video evidence of him performing these tasks and these feats. To me, it's like, well, I'm sorry, but Satya takes it.
He was proven to be a fraud, though. Jesus was never proven to be a fraud. Different.
Okay, but if we have a characters all throughout history who are doing this, whether it's Joseph Smith or whether it's Muhammad or whether it's Jesus or whether it's the other people named Jesus who are talked about in the Annals of Josephus, these historical accounts, who are also gathering a following at this time, claiming that they have supernatural gifts and abilities. They're performing prophecies that actually come true. All of these things, we see these people throughout history. Some of them are making miraculous claims about Julius Caesar. Some of them are making miraculous claims about, Norse mythological figures. And we have divine prophet-like gurus, thousands of them.
But they're all proven.
And yet,
wrong.
But they're not. A lot of them, we don't have proof that they're wrong. We just have accounts of people claiming that these miracles happened. And yet, as historians, we look at that and we say it's unconvincing evidence. Sure, I can tell you that today I walked on water. Prove me wrong.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I should look into that stuff more. I would say, though, that the Christian worldview as laid out in the Bible is a coherent worldview as opposed to others. But let me get back to...
I would disagree with that pretty wholeheartedly, but that's not, unless you really want to get into that today. I would love if you, that might even be a good one to call back with at some point.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Okay. I call back with that.
We still got time though. No, we still got time though. So I still want to continue the discussion. I just didn't want to completely derail into a different,
right,
totally different discussion while we were still on this one.
Coherency of worldviews next time. Now, for this time, I would encourage you dudes to consider this. Consider higher spatial dimensions. Consider beings that can traverse higher spatial dimensions. Is that possible? And if it is, could that be what we call the spirit realm?
Okay, so there's a lot of issues with how you would demonstrate that this is even possible. It was like, could you think about it being possible? Sure, but especially if we're talking about some other dimension that has some relation to this one, right? Like the only reason we should care about that one is if there are consequences within this dimension related to that one. So
just like 3D,
that would mean
right?
that you should be able to demonstrate that there is influence from that dimension. And so if so, what evidence do we have that exists?
Well, we don't know how to traverse that yet, but
so then how did you even think that was a possibility? If there's no, like, for example, if there's a God out there that is causing, like, that created people or that is causing miracles to happen, we should see evidence of those miracles happening, right? Like, we should have physical evidence that something changed in this dimension of reality. So what do you have that convinces you that there is something like that?
Can I tag team on that? Just add one little thing, and then we'll let you talk in a second. Yeah. An example of this would be if I came, because what I heard you say was, if these beings exist, then this should happen. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to grant this premise that they exist. It's like, okay, if they exist, then this, sure. But if my farts cure cancer, then
no.
You know, by some supernatural means, then I am a miracle working, cancer curing fart man. But you first have to demonstrate that they actually cure cancer. So one way we could do this with, for example, with prayer, you could say, if prayer works, then we can't necessarily measure these supernatural God rays that are connecting us to God or whatever in this higher spatial dimension, but we should be able to measure when people pray, do people get better? And there's been prayer studies that have been done on this. There's a really famous one called the Templeton study, where they looked at all of these cases of people. Some of them knew that they were being prayed for, and they actually fared worse as a result. And some people, it was the complete opposite. So these are areas where we can measure the interaction and see, like, do they fare better than a placebo? Do they fare better than chance in double-blind, randomized, controlled clinical trials? And the answer is they don't.
But isn't it also known people who have hope do better medically?
But here's the question. Here's the question along with that, is we know the neurotransmitters, we know the hormone activity, we know the receptor activity that relates to some of these emotions. So we know that dopamine and serotonin have an effect. And so how do we say that this particular emotion by itself was the cause versus an influx of dopamine within certain cells or an efflux of some other compounds? Like, where is this intersection of these different variables? How do you demonstrate that your variable is the one that's causing the change? And here's where I would argue, if you're going to try to advocate for this supernatural dimension, and this is what I mean by we would see evidence that they are related, right? Like, because if the mechanism, like, let's say God does exist and he made human bodies to work in a very specific way, that would mean that he planned dopamine to work the way that it does, that he planned serotonin to work the way that it does, et cetera. So we would expect that these supernatural interventions would then cause this physical cascade. Otherwise, if that's not happening, how do we know it was the supernatural thing causing something and not a result of the physical cascade?
Right. It's very difficult to test with the scientific theory, right?
Right, which is why you have to give us a reason,
the method,
to believe that it is outside of these natural processes. And I think that's where we're having the issue following you.
Right. So the scientific method seems to not have proven the higher dimensions or the spirit realm yet. Now, consider just because a prayer happens doesn't mean God has to do it either. So, like, we can't control God. So, prayer.
Okay, but why start with the assumption that God is real?
Say what?
But why start with the assumption that God is real? You wouldn't do this for anything else. If I say, well, you know,
in the Bible,
I pray to Bigfoot, and sometimes he says no.
Well, Bigfoot
but
didn't reveal himself to you. God revealed himself to us in the Bible. That's why Christians believe.
But Zil, yeah, I hear the same thing from Muslims. The same exact thing from Muslims.
We can look at Muhammad, and he had some issues. He thought he was.
So did Jesus.
So did a lot of people in the Bible. So how do I know which one is correct, if any of them? How do I know?
Never had issues like that. No one thought Jesus was demon possessed. Muhammad was.
Yeah, there's literally no. I'm gonna stop you right there because there is literally a Bible verse where the religious authorities at the time said that Jesus was driving out demons by the power of demons.
Then that was a lie. That's when he discussed the only unforgivable sin, which is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
You just moved the goalpost. Do you see what you did? You made a claim and you said this is evidence for Jesus. Okay. This is evidence for Jesus' transcendent position.
You're right. You're right. I should not
Zil,
have said nobody.
Were you?
I should not have said that.
Zil, were you raised to be Christian? Is that the belief system you've had your whole life?
I was raised to be Christian, and then I became not religious at all for a period of my life. And then I decided as an adult that I believe. So I chose it for myself.
But do you think that if you were born in a Hindu household, that maybe you would have gone a different way when
for sure.
you decided to So do you think that your upbringing had influence on which belief system you adopted?
Of course, but then again, as I mentioned, as an adult, I have read part of the Quran, a decent part of it, and I did that with an open mind. It was very scary, but But
it sounds to me like there wasn't, because we're having trouble kind of making the connection of evidence and what you're saying is evidence. And so I wonder if, like, a lot of times when people just read the different books and then decide one, it sounds a lot like they're going off of vibes to make the decision for them. And there's not a lot of compelling evidence that people have given to say why one is actually has enough evidence behind it. And even so, this approach of I'm going to read the different religions and then make my decision based on the best one of those is also a bit problematic if you're assuming that one of them is going to be true. So I'm curious about what convinced you to believe this thing. Like, what was the best argument that you came to make this decision?
I would say when I made my decision to follow Jesus more again, it was because of his character and who he is. Later in that he's worthy of following. And I did believe in the creationist view already. After I became a Christian, I started looking at some apologetics more. You know, the Bible is the most well-attested ancient manuscript known to man by far. So
I would ask for some evidence to back that up.
I need to pull up evidence to back that up? Okay.
My question is, what do you mean when you say it's the most attested? Like, is it the most written about? Is it the most attested by the archaeological data? Because I will take that claim on all day long.
It's like the most number of manuscripts by far that have.
Yeah, but that means nothing. That means nothing.
No, it doesn't.
People could write. I'll tell you why it means nothing, right? So there's a logical fallacy called an argumentum ad populum, where it's like, just because a lot of people believe one thing and talk about and promote one thing, that does not mean it's true. There's over 1 billion people that believe in Islam that are writing about it, that are writing manuscripts immediately after Muhammad died.
Lines of
That doesn't make it true.
text. No. It's about lines of transmission of the text. It's textual criticism apologetics. Okay.
Yeah.
Lines of transmission of the biblical text, which points to the authenticity of the word we have today. Okay.
What do you mean when you say authenticity? Are you saying that what our current manuscripts, that they match the originals? Because we don't have the originals.
Right. We don't have the autographs, but we do have our earliest writings are from within the lifetime of people who actually were with Jesus. If you take the early,
no,
that's not true.
Our oldest, most extant, like so you have manuscripts that are completely lost. The only one that survives that dates, like the closest dating to Jesus's life, is called P52. It's about the size of a credit card. It's a small manuscript that contains a few partial fragments of the book of John, and it dates to about 125 to 150 CE. That's over 100 years after Jesus died. That's our oldest surviving manuscript, period.
Hold on. I got P66. 1 second. Oh, no. P52 predates that. So that's roughly AD 100 to 150. But, so that's when that was written, but we analyzed when we thought the autographs were written when we date them for the earliest date, correct?
Yeah, but we don't have anything that the actual manuscript itself survives from that period. You can analyze the writing style. Here's the thing: you can
autographs.
We're not talking about the autographs. We're talking about anything that dates to within the time span, the life of the disciples, the apostles, anyone who saw him. What we have is fragments that date to at least 100 years after Jesus died. That's our oldest surviving slivers. And then we have entire books that are even older, where we start to get gospels, and we can analyze the writing and say, okay, based off of the types of words that they use, the things that they reference, this probably was written during this time period, 50 CE, 70 CE. And even then, it's largely based off of scholarly guesses, but there's no indication that we have no way of knowing if someone came along later and just scratched out a line here and replaced it with a line here and said that Jesus, cured someone completely of leprosy rather than, their pain went away and they went home, or, there's a giant gap where you have over 100 years where stuff's tossed around by word of mouth and a game of telephone and, God knows what.
No. This is why we talk about the transmission of the text.
Okay, then how was the text transmitted? How was the text transmitted from 30 CE until 125 CE?
We have all of these manuscripts to show where it traveled to, which countries, multiple lines.
No, we have nothing. We have nothing during that time span. 100 years after Jesus, there's nothing.
Okay, now regarding dates, I have here some of the earliest dates for First Thessalonians is 49 to 51 AD. Galatians.
No, not when it was written.
To 55 AD.
I'm not talking about when scholars think the original was probably written. I'm saying actual manuscripts that survive.
Well, why?
Actual papyrus fragments.
I'm establishing that these could have been written from people who met Jesus during Jesus' lifetime, in their lifetime.
And they could have been changed.
Wouldn't you suggest that the autographs could have been changed? See, I don't think you would believe this no matter what, dude. That's what I think.
No, what I'm saying is if let's say that right now I say a bunch of things, I do a bunch of things, and a whole religion forms around me, and then 100 years goes by, And there's, all of the writings that from within my lifetime and 100 years after my lifetime are completely lost to time. But what we have is 2,000 years go by, and along that somewhere in that chain, people write about stuff. It might have been written earlier, but there's an entire opaque 100-year window where we know absolutely nothing in terms of like what manuscripts were like in that time period. They could have been. We know that manuscripts have changed. If you read the works of like someone like Bart Ehrman, you'll see specific examples. You can put two manuscripts side by side and see where someone wrote a note in the margin and then it found its way into our Bible. A great example of this is in Matthew 6. There's a verse that says, if anyone is angry at his brother, he's guilty of judgment. And some scribe later came in, didn't like that verse, and said, he wrote into the margins, if anyone is guilty of being angry at his brother without a cause, the Greek word is e-key, he wrote that into the margin. Some later scribe came along, saw that e-key, and was like, oh, this must be part of the text, wrote it into the text, and then it became part of a later part of our Bible. So if you look at the King James, it's literally pulling that. What?
Is there a note in the Bible for that part?
For over 1,000 years, no. And then as we got older manuscripts, we suddenly realized, oh shit, we've been doing it wrong. But here is a smoking gun example, and I can give you dozens more of times where verses have been removed or added or changed or altered.
Okay.
And like that's just what we know from our earliest manuscripts that have 100-year gap during the most critical period of transmission.
I see what you're saying. So based on evidence of scribe differences, which we acknowledge, and I would argue we've converged on text closer to the original over time. For example, the Parisipe adulterae shouldn't even be in the Bible. Me and another brother think that. It should not be there. That's the one where Jesus says, cast the first stone, you're sinless, or whatever.
I agree, and it's probably my favorite. It's my favorite story about Jesus, and yet it wasn't in the originals.
I know, it sucks. It's unfortunate. They should remove it. It's a nice story, but they should remove it. So for these parts like the Parisipe, they do have a note in the Bible. I just think they should just take it out. But I still believe that based on all the manuscripts we have, we do have what was originally written. I understand what you're saying about the earliest piece of paper we have is from 100 AD. Let me see.
I guess here's my overall thought on it is that you have 100 years where we're just missing. We don't know. But what we do know is we know how people function psychologically. We know how big fish stories change over time. We know how stories that you tell now change later. We know how people misremember things. So even if someone was an eyewitness, if they didn't write it down until 20 years after the fact, even if they were the one writing it, rather than they tell it to someone who tells it to someone who translates it and writes it down, that's more steps for it to change. And that's a process that we know when that happens. We know stories change because we have evidence of this happening all the time. So we have all of these problems here in the most critical time period. We don't have any text that Jesus wrote himself, that he wrote firsthand. We don't have any authentic stuff. So for me, the bar for a book like the Bible that is allegedly divinely inspired, to not have the originals, to not have God divinely preserve it, in and of itself is very damning. But then when you take into account the way stories change over time, that we know that this is how stories operate, we know this is how humans psychologically operate, to me, it makes it extremely unconvincing that these stories are true. There's elements I'll grant you. Jesus probably was a real guy. I'm not a mythicist. I think that he probably was killed, but that doesn't really get you anywhere, because there are a lot of people who were these messianic figures, claimed to be prophets, got a following, that then were killed by the Romans for insurrection. Like, this is not an unusual arc. And then you have followers who are grieving, who they might be having grief hallucinations. There might be imposters coming and pretending to be Jesus. Jesus might have had a twin. He might not even have ever died, and someone might come along and say, I died and I was rose from the dead. We have faith healers today like W.V. Grant who make these same claims. So for me, all of this stuff adds up. And when you start getting the big picture, it's just like, I'm sorry, I'm just not convinced.
Okay.
And I think this is Zil, I'll let you kind of take your last word here, and then this will probably be a good place to wrap up the call. But kind of what are your final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I do believe that you would have to insert some speculation into what might have happened. I don't believe you can positively assert that they are lying. You can point to other times that scribes have done such, but you can't positively assert that it did happen. So I'll say that.
Yeah, and I agree. I think whenever you're dealing with history, you're dealing with probabilities. You're dealing with what's the most likely, for sure.
Right.
But Zil, thank you so much. This has been a very pleasant conversation.
Yeah.
It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, and please call back. Like, this is a really good discussion. I appreciate how kind you were speaking and that you were really engaging with the conversation. So please feel free to call back. And also, I'd be curious to hear you talk with Godless Engineer on AXP sometime, because he is a mythicist. So I'd be interested to see kind of your approach to all these different conversations. But genuinely enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, Zil.
Me too. Thanks, guys. God bless and take it easy. 07.
Take care.
Take care. All right. That was a great call. And I'll wrap up with some announcements here. We've got the top 5 patrons this week. We have, in no particular order, Oops, all singularity, Dingleberry Jackson, Kalevi Helvetti, period, just the period, Casey Kickendall, and an honorable mention to Jeanette Corlett Black. Thank you so much for our patrons this week. And I
don't know how you read those with a straight face.
Yeah, I feel a lot of these are the same every week, so you kind of get used to them. But if anybody wants their name to be included on this wonderful list, you can go onto Patreon and get in that top 6 to get your name read during the show at tiny.cc/PatreonTH. And once again, for people who missed kind of the beginning, where can people find you? Anything specific you've got going on that you want to call attention to?
Yeah, at the moment, my number one thing is my channel. It's what I'm focused on, Holy Kool-Aid. So all of my arguments related to history, archaeology, even textual criticism. I've gone into how the Bible has changed. I've done much deeper dives than what I talked about here on the show. But yeah, I cover a wide variety of stuff over there. That's my number one spot.
Awesome. And thank you once again to our audience and to our callers. This has been a great show today. And let's throw out some love rings, if we can. If you don't believe, this is your community. We appreciate your love and support and being here with us today. And if you do believe, we don't hate you.
We don't hate you. We're just not convinced.
Bye, everyone.
We want the truth! So watch Truth Wanted Live, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect online at tiny.cc/call TW.